Welcome to Equip, Build, Mature. It's a windy day here on Crete. As I like to do on Saturdays, I want to do an overview of one of the books of the Bible. And today we're going to look at the Gospel of Mark. So, who wrote the document? God, in His written word, has a lot of information about Mark. Now, John and Mark are spoken of more than Luke or Matthew. Now, Luke mentioned Mark several times in the book of Acts. Jesus' growing church at Jerusalem met in the home of Mark's mother. Mark started the first missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas, but then he quit. But then later on, he traveled with Barnabas to Cyprus for more mission work. Mark became significant even in the Apostle Paul's life. He was one of the last people that Paul mentioned in his final letter in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and in verse 11. Mark's most significant personal connection was with the Apostle Peter. Now, Peter was probably Mark's source for the material in the gospel that he wrote. Peter visited the home of Mark's mother so many times that the servants could recognize him just by his voice, as we see in Acts chapter 12, verses 12 to 14, after the angel released Peter from prison. It is implied that Mark was present at Gethsemane. He may have been the young man that watched the events from a safe distance. We see this in Mark chapter 14, verses 51 and 52. This has led some scholars to assume that the Lord's Supper, or the Last Supper, took place in Mark's family home. So what time in history did this take place? Well, Mark made brief comments about Jesus' prophecy of the temple's destruction, which happened in AD 70. We see this in chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, and in chapter 13, verses 14 to 23. So we can assume that Mark wrote the gospel before that tragedy of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This gospel has a distinct Roman influence. It is a strong contrast to the Jewish emphasis of Matthew's gospel. Now, Mark did not emphasize fulfilled prophecy. Like you can compare the narrative of Matthew 21, 1 through 6, the same narrative in Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 4, and Matthew relates it to a prophecy, whereas Mark doesn't. Now, when Mark did use an Aramaic term in writing this gospel, he would explain it, as we see in chapter 3, verse 17. So all of this suggests that Mark could have been in the city of Rome when he wrote this gospel. He wrote based on Peter's memories before Peter died, which was around 64 to 68 AD. Mark may have written the gospel between the years 57 and 59 AD. So why is Mark so important? Well, Mark's gospel describes Jesus as constantly going somewhere. He's on the move. And Mark shows Jesus continuing to move forward toward Jerusalem and all the events in Jesus' last days. And this keeps the listener and the reader's mind constantly looking ahead to the cross and to Jesus being raised from the dead. Now, Mark used the word immediately 39 times. That gives the idea that Jesus' time on earth was short. And it also indicates that Jesus had so much to accomplish in his very few years on earth as he served God's mission while he was on earth. So what is the big idea about the Gospel of Mark? What's the major emphasis? Well, Matthew's Gospel described Jesus as the King. Mark revealed Jesus as God's servant. Jesus always worked towards a larger purpose. Mark summarized this point in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, where it reads, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, Mark filled his gospel with the miracles of Jesus. He repeatedly illustrated both the power and the compassion of the Son of God. Mark revealed more than Jesus being just a good teacher that offered people spiritual renewal. Mark also described Jesus as the true God and the true man. He reached into the lives of people, and he changed their physical reality, and he changed their circumstances. Jesus used his life to bring about change connected to his ultimate purpose. And during his life of service, Jesus constantly pointed to the best way that he would serve us by his death on the cross and being raised from the dead. It is only through faith in these works of Jesus that humans find eternal redemption for their whole selves, for their spirit, their soul, and their body. Jesus is our model for how to live life, serving others as he did. So how does this Gospel of Mark apply to us today in the 21st century? 3 times in Mark chapters 8, 9, and 10, Mark depicted Jesus telling his disciples about his great sacrifice and his ultimate victory over death. At one point, his disciples totally rejected his teaching. We see this in chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. Another time, they were too preoccupied, too concerned about other issues. We see this in chapter 9, verses 31 to 34, in chapter 10, verses 32 to 37. So while Jesus prepared for the greatest service in the history of the human race, his disciples were only thinking about themselves, their position, and their safety. Are you ever like Jesus' disciples? Do you ever struggle to reflect Jesus' attitude of sacrificial service in your daily life? We often fight temptations when we have an opportunity to serve another person. We are tempted at times to pull back and focus on our wants, our comfort, or to protect our own desires and our own interests. Throughout the book of Mark, God challenges us to be like Jesus, to be a servant. We must break free from our man-made boxes and our cultural expectations. We must break the habit of being selfish, because it is a habit. It's not that we have to do it, it's that we habitually do it. We must begin to make deliberate steps to sacrificially give ourselves, to serve, and to reflect God's mercy and grace to those who people our world. Hope you guys have a great Saturday. May God continue to bless each of us as we, like Mark says, as we strive to serve God and to serve the people he's put in our lives. You guys have a great day. Take care.